and Dothan, Alabama.
Marshall in the middle.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the center of the universe. We're here for the All-American Hour. We got Sergeant Major retired Jim Champagne here with us and Ranger Nate. We're going to hang out here at the center of the universe where Ardennes and Longstreet meet. Many of us spent, I don't know how many miles, how many hours, how many minutes. I did not walk down Ardennes, right? I ran down Ardennes Street. Ardennes shaped me as a young paratrooper because you just run down the road and it's like the Glopper and Towel and Funk and just all those names where they brainwashed us so bad when we went into replacement detachment that those guys became our heroes. And we grew our own heroes. And we've got two of them here with me today, Ranger Nate and Sergeant Major Champagne. Ranger Nate, break us in. Tell us about our guest here and what's going on.
All right. Well, thanks for having us, Will. It's great to be back on All-American Hour with you. And Command Sergeant Major Jim Champagne is great. Great guest. Great honor to have you on. If anybody knows anything about the infantry or Ranger community in the United States Army, Sergeant Major Champagne doesn't need any introduction. We already got one viewer out there who probably already knows Sergeant Major there. But no, we have retired Command Sergeant Major, 1st Infantry Division, former 1st Infantry Division Command Sergeant Major. And but on Ardennes and Longstreet, we know him primarily as AKA Big Jim, AKA 3 Panther 7, Command Sergeant Major there. I think you did 3 years, Sergeant Major there as Battalion Command Sergeant Major of 3rd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. Awesome. That's where we know him from there on Ardennes Street. And it's good to have you on. Sergeant Major, break it down to us. How you been all these past years?
Guys, first of all, thanks for having me all the way airborne. It's always good to hang out with a bunch of old paratroopers. So thanks for having me on this morning. Things are going great. I started in the 82nd as a young 17-year-old punk, coming right out of basic and airborne school in 1982. Charlie Company, 1st of the 504th was my first assignment there. I still remember my first squad leader, a guy by the name of Art Vigil. So I don't know if you guys ever ran across him while you were running up and down Ardennes, but my 1st battalion commander there, and you see him on Fox News quite a bit, is now retired General Kellogg, but then he was Lieutenant General Kellogg and our Lieutenant Colonel Kellogg. And I still have a letter he wrote every brand new paratrooper parents when they came into the battalion. I still have that letter that he wrote my parents, congratulating them and thanking them for letting me be in his unit and how he was going to train me to be a great paratrooper. So the conditions were set for a lifelong, career of jumping out of airplanes.
That's awesome. That is awesome. 3 Panther 9. I think I made a mistake there and said 3 Panther 7. That's 3 Panther 9. My bad on that, Sergeant Major. I'll get out and do some push-ups here in a minute, man. But,
I wasn't going to bust you out, Aggie. I wasn't going to bust you out.
I was like, wait a minute, 7? No, man. Anyways, that is awesome. Sergeant Major, the word was back in the day that you made Command Sergeant Major in 17 years time in service. Was that correct? Am I a little off?
Yeah, you're pretty close, Nate. It was about 18 years. Yeah, 18 years.
Jesus, criminy. Good Lord. So what time?
Hey, that's about average, to be honest with you, for most paratroopers around that time. There's some guys out there that have been a lot fast tracking a lot. Dan Daly, the former SMA of the Army, he was like 15 years when he went to the academy or something like that. There's some great Americans out there, some great leaders that have some storied careers. But 18 is about average, so it's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that.
Outstanding.
What were your first memories, Sergeant Major, of being a young private there on Ardennes? Did you have a cherry party? Did they like hang you out of a window or beat your belly or anything like that?
No, see, I was fortunate enough. I was 6'1" and about 190 pounds when I reported in. So saw a first class Horn, who was my platoon sergeant at the time, old Vietnam veteran, saw me walk in and he goes, "You're my RTO." So I became the platoon RTO right from day one. So I fell under the umbrella of the platoon sergeant, so nobody really messed with me. But, I do remember, like I think it was either probably the first weekend I was there in the day room, not, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, just checking things out. At 17, that's a big adjustment. So you went from hanging out with your high school buddies in high school, you're playing football, playing grab ass, all that kind of stuff that you did. And all of a sudden you go into, a permanent party unit. Not only that, it's an airborne unit, and you're all of a sudden hanging around with men. So it was eye opening for sure. But I remember that first weekend I was down in the day room just watching. Nobody had TVs back then in the room, so you went down in the day room, and I was sitting down there, and some guys were fooling around, and I guess they had pocketed a couple blanks from a training exercise or anything. So they had a Coke can with some sterno in it. So they thought it would be a fun idea to just take those blanks and throw them on top of the sterno and let them explode in the day room. And after about the second one, I said, "That's probably time for me to go back up to my room." But yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on. But, in the early 80s, there was a large drug problem in the Army, and I saw a lot of that coming in. Back in the day, if you came up hot on the urinalysis test, they would take the door off your bedroom door. So, yeah. So you had no door, so you knew all the guys who got popped on the piss test because they had no doors on the room, and there was a lot of them, unfortunately.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Do you
But
remember
what,
a particular?
Oh, go ahead.
Do you remember a particular jump or a time when you realized that, like, look, I'm in the 82nd Airborne Division. This is dangerous stuff here. Was there a time like that for you?
My first 5 jumps with First 504, they were going through a testing called they called it the paprika jumps. It was an acronym for something. But what we did, my first 5 jumps was full Mach 4. So my first jump in the 82nd Airborne Division was wearing full Mach 4 gear, all the boots, the gloves, the mask, and and I'm saying, what the hell is going on here? Is this the norm? But my first 5 jumps in the 82nd were in full Mach 4.
Can you imagine jumping out into a chemical environment? I mean, it's like, no.
Yeah. But they tested it, and then so it went from like the first time I jumped in 82nd to the last jump I had as 3 Panther 9. Never, for most of my career, I never really had any entanglements or anything like that. And Drew Pappas, now retired General Pappas out of ForceCom, was my battalion commander, and he goes, "Come on, Sergeant Major, let's one last jump with the boys." I said, "Sir, I'm already done, man. I cleared. I'll give you a helmet." I said, "Oh shit, okay, let's go." So we went out there. Oh, he was on left door number 1. I was right door number 1, and we ended up jumping out. And behind Colonel Pappas was the FSO, the Brigade SFSO, and he jumped out and do the normal checks, looking around. All of a sudden, this guy comes whipping through the air. All of a sudden, I got a high altitude entanglement, right? And I'm looking, I'm going like, oh shit, this is my last jump with the 82nd Airborne Division. I've never had anything done, and we're gonna crash and burn. Luckily, it was the best landing I ever had under 2 parachutes, so pretty fortunate. So one extreme to another, in jump experiences.
That is awesome.
Amen. What was it like back in the day of the mentality of the 82nd? Did that all the way airborne stuff get into you? Were you a maroon beret wearing kind of steely-eyed paratrooper? We can do it no matter what. Did that get to you like it did me?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the days running PT. We'd be in company formation running down Ardennes, right? And it was not uncommon where 2 companies all of a sudden would step off in the middle of Ardennes and just get after it. It happened all the time. There was a lot of pushing and shoving. The Devils in baggy pants were a lot better than the Panthers, a lot better than the Falcons and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of that. And then, I also had a company commander. He was a college wrestler, and a guy by the name of Straley. And he would just go down the street and, whether it was a friend of his, classmate or whatever, He said, "Hey, meet us down at Bear Pit down there by Towel Stadium." Right. And then we would just company on company inside the Bear Pit to the last person standing. So, I mean, you couldn't help it, the first time I went home on leave, it was cool because I had a set of khakis. So I had my khakis on, PFC stripes on, spit shine jump boots, beret, walking through the airport. You're pretty, you felt, pretty proud of being an airborne, paratrooper.
Do you remember a particularly long road march or a particularly hard night or some type of something that was like, will this ever end?
Does it never suck? I mean, I don't think there's ever a time where you're out there training with the 82nd where they're not really, testing you to, the limit. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I'd have to think about it. But I mean, there's been some pretty cold days. I mean, I remember, back in the day, there was no Gore-Tex. You wore your smoking jacket, your little green field jacket liner, and everything back then had to be worn under your BDU top. Right? You couldn't put anything, and black beanies were, you couldn't wear black beanies. And we wore jungle boots, so it didn't matter. We wore jungle boots all year round. So we'd be out there in the middle of January out there, doing a jump and then doing movements, and, you'd stop for the night and you'd just be freezing your butt off. We did a great mission with, it was Colonel Nix at the time was the commander, and we loaded up at Fort Bragg. We did an airborne operation into Fort Chaffee. It was airfield seizure type of operation at Fort Chaffee. Loaded up, flew to Fort Hood, Texas, jumped into Fort Hood, Texas, took it down. This is all back to back, day after day, within about a 72-hour period. And then we did that mission and then loaded up, did pre-jump again and jumped back into Bragg, all within like 72 hours or so. It was, it was pretty amazing things that those commanders would think of, really testing the capabilities. It's not only testing our capabilities, it's all about the combined fight, making sure the Air Force can have that type of, execution, making sure Army Aviation can have that type of execution. Yeah, there's been a lot of hard nights, I got to tell you. Jumping at Pat McCall, jumping on the, Ryan Luzon with the cactus, right? There's nothing special about having an ass full of cactus for a whole night after you hit the ground.
It is amazing how effed up Luzon drop zone was in the early days. There was huge pieces of concrete and rebar and cactuses. Look, Luzon was a dangerous drop zone to jump on back in the late 80s. That was crazy. Tell me about that mentality of don't put anything on the outside of your BDU top. I lived through that too. Tell me, dude, we used to stack things underneath our shirts to keep us warm. Why wouldn't we wear a field jacket? Do you remember any of the history behind that?
I don't. I just think this is the paratrooper way. You just didn't wear your field jacket. I used to buy my size, my uniforms one size bigger just so I could put more shit under my BDU top when I went to the field. It's just, fortunately, our Army is to the point now where, common sense, people, when you're cold, you put your beanie on, you put your fleece jacket on or whatever. Back then, it was all about perception. You'd be out in the rain, you'd be soaking wet. You'd have your wet weather gear under your BDU top. What sense does that make, right?
Yeah, and you couldn't even put gloves on. Don't even ask to put gloves on. If you put gloves on, everybody had to have them on. And it was the old green inserts with the black leather gloves and all that. But everybody had to wear the same thing, dress across the board in the field. Yeah. What you got there, Will?
Yeah, it was crazy. Sergeant Major, tell me about schools. What schools did you go to that were hard? Me and Ranger Nate, we always talk about Jumpmaster School. I was a black hat, and he was a multi-time student. He loved Jumpmaster School, so we went back several times. Tell me
twice, baby, 2 times full time.
Well, tell me about your history.
Yeah, so Nate, that's the same. Don't feel I was a recycling Jumpmaster School, so I had to go through twice, but it made me a better Jumpmaster.
Yes, sir.
But so probably the most mentally challenging, stressful school was the Jumpmaster course at Fort Bragg. Absolutely, hands down. That's why I wear the master parachute wings. That's why that's probably one of the most coveted badges that I wear that I'm most proud of. Obviously, the most physically demanding school would be Ranger School. Graduating that, it's both physically and mentally. I've been to SEER Level C. That was pretty tough. That was a fun course to go through. Learned a lot there. Just a lot of great courses. I had an opportunity throughout my career to have the ability to have leaders that saw some type of potential in me in whatever capacity. And I had, the opportunity to go to a lot of great courses. U.S. Army Sniper course, the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. Just some great Pathfinder, air assault. All the infantry stuff you should do if you've been an infantryman. For enough years. So, Jump Master School was absolutely probably the toughest school mentally that I've been to, and Ranger School probably the most physically demanding school that I've been to. Those are probably the two schools that I hold closest to my heart.
Now, as a Ranger instructor, I believe 5th RTB in the mountains, you were a Ranger instructor for a couple of years or so.
Yeah, that was a great assignment. So, again, I was I was a scout platoon sergeant at 3 Panther. I've been doing that for a little over 3 years, going on 4 years. It was time for me to move. So I saw my peers, starting to get selected for recruiting, started to get selected for drill sergeant. And I said, if I'm going to go TDA, I want to go somewhere where I can at least stay on the cutting edge of tactics and be able to influence, leadership. And I put 4187 in to go to the mountain. At the time, it was Sergeant Major. What's it, Mac, 3rd Brigade Sergeant Major, big black guy, bald head. I'll tell you the story. You used to have the little shopettes with the barber shops by the brigade headquarters and all that, right? So I went in there to get a haircut one day, and Mac's sitting there in the barber shop, waiting for a haircut. And he gets up and he sits in the, everybody's quiet too, because you got the brigade sergeant major, so nobody's playing grab ass in the barber shop, right? Max sits in the in a chair, and the barber goes, "Sergeant Major, how you like it?" He just looks at him and he goes, "Make it bleed." Hell yeah! Back in the day, man.
Hell yes.
But it was great. RTB. So I get back to the story. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there down a rabbit hole.
That's all we do.
Yeah. So I sent him the 41. He had been a Ranger instructor in his past life. I went up and talked to him in his office, and he said, "Absolutely, Staff Sergeant Champagne, I'm going to go ahead and sign this 4187. Have a great time. You're going to love it up there in the mountains." And I really did. It was one of the greatest assignments I ever had. Teaching mountaineering, doing small unit tactics. Nate, extreme terrain. Logs will just kick your ass. And then I just remember times during lunch where the students would be down at the lower overhang in lowers doing knots and stuff like that, and we'd go up to the company area, and there was the Etowah River went through the mountain ranger camp right in the middle of that, and the conservation guys would stock it with rainbow trout. So we always knew when they dropped the rainbow trout in there. So at lunch we'd go in there and drop a line in there and catch 6 trout in about 10 minutes, and then go back down there and finish the day's work. So it was a great assignment. Yeah, Dahlonega is a beautiful area, and I was fortunate to meet some incredible non-commissioned officers up there, legends, Ranger legends up there. It was a great assignment.
That's awesome. What? Let me ask you a question. So when I first got there, going back to our background together, when I first got to 3 Panther, I was an E6 promotable coming off the trail. And I remember you were like, "Hey, man, got some good news for you. Good news and bad news. Good news is you could stay. Bad news is I can't put you in as a platoon sergeant yet until you graduate United States Army Ranger School." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to go anyway, Sergeant Major." And I'm sure you heard that 1,000 times. And I write about this in my book, Lifer, because it was a mind opener right there. Yeah, you could say you're going to go, but until somebody throws it in your face and says, "Hey, do or don't," or make or break your career on it. And so you were like, "I could put you in the S3 shop until you take off to Ranger School." Well, actually, I had an ANOC class, and then I walked on to Ranger School afterwards, and or I could put you back as a squad leader. and you were like, you know what, you're jump master. I'm going to go ahead and make you squad leader in Charlie Company. And I was like, Sergeant Major, all due respect. I said, all due respect. I said, I already got 4 years squad leader time, man. I just finished drill sergeant time, man. I'm ready to be a platoon sergeant now. You're like, I got you, but I'm going to make you squad leader because you need to get back in the field. You've been away from the field for 2 years. I'm going to put you back in the field if you think you're going to have any chance in Ranger School. And you did exactly that. So I contribute a lot of my success first time going to Ranger School without that.
You're a great success story. And this is what I remember also is that when you came back from Ranger School, you were a changed man. You know, you were somebody that was ready to get after it. And I'm sure you had some humbling times there, but it made you a better leader, made you more proficient in small unit tactics. And you brought that back when you became a platoon sergeant. You brought that back. You can absolutely see how that affected your platoon and everything that you did day to day. So, you know, I really tried to push it. You know, just like jump master school. So, hey, let's talk about jump master school for a second. You know, as a battalion sergeant major, when I first got back to the 82nd in 2002, and I started off as the op sergeant major for 3325 until I was waiting for a battalion of the CSM select. And I would go to pre-jump and I would see the same jump masters doing pre-jump day in and day out, where I saw squad leaders, staff sergeants just sitting on their ass, you know, in the chalks, you know, catching a nap. So, you know, if a lot of folks who don't understand the procedures of you know, the pre-jump and then the jump and the execution, is that it's hours of work to get everybody prepared to get on an aircraft, exit an aircraft, land safely, and then you have to do your job as a platoon sergeant or a squad leader later. Where these guys were just sitting back and all they had to do was just jump, get the naps, eat their, you know, lickies and chewies, and then they were fresh to go on to the mission. They didn't have all that mental stress leading up to, you know, the mission, right? So that was my mindset. I said, when I became a battalion sergeant major, jump master school became one of the top priorities. And the fact that in the ASOP, it says, in order to be technically proficient as a non-commissioned officer, you have to be jump master qualified. You should be jump master qualified. So you might even remember this, Nate. I brought all the non-jump master NCOs in, and I said, ASOP says you need to be technically proficient. You're going to go to jump master school. If you do not, within the next 6 months, go to jump master school, your next NCOER will reflect that you are not technically sound in your job as a papa, right?
That's right.
And the first time we sent an NCOER up like that, man, I think I had 50 people in the classroom doing the pre-jump, you know, jump master test, right?
Yep. Yeah, that was awesome. I remember you put me in charge of that too. I was like, all right, Sergeant Major, I got this. And we selected, I think it was the top 3 that tested. I had them test out. It was like a week and a half. And the top 3, I would send you the names, and it would be anywhere from an E5 to a, you know, second lieutenant normally. And then you would select by their score. All right, we get 2 slots. These 2 are going to go. And then the third one will go to the next class. But we had an excellent turnout. Our battalion, 3 Panther, had an excellent turnout in jump master school and Ranger school too.
Yeah, and Ranger school.
First
you know, time. Yeah. You know, I couldn't knock them for not going to Ranger school. I mean, there were some great non-commissioned officers that weren't Ranger qualified. Don't get me wrong. But I really tried to tell them, you know, this could help you in the future. It gives you more opportunities throughout your career. You know, and back to the jump master stuff is that it didn't matter if you were a corporal or a captain ready to go into command. If you didn't score well on the pre-jump master test that Aggie was giving you and all that, you were racked and stacked that way. So if you had to go, you had to be top. So if a corporal was outscoring, you know, a lieutenant that's been there for a while or a captain, they went before they did. And I had great commanders. So we had Marty Schweitzer was the battalion commander when I first got there. Pete Johnson came in on his coattail, and then I had Drew Poppets. I mean, as a battalion sergeant major, I could not have been more fortunate to have 3 commanders of their calibers. You know, it was very, very good. And our non-commissioned corps, non-commissioned officer corps was far one of the best ones I've ever served with in the Army. They were just getting after it every day.
Absolutely. No, that was a tough battalion, very tough battalion. We had accolades from the top down. And don't get me wrong, like any other battalion on the street, especially after coming back from OEF and OIF and all that, we had problems. We had, problems on the street, alcohol related incidences and stuff like that. But I tell you what, as soon as we get on those trucks and head out to the field for 2 weeks, all that shit was forgotten about, and we performed and we executed. And I mean, I remember Sergeant Major. I remember we had like chief of staff of the Army coming down and wanting to watch, selecting the division commander would select our battalion to perform live fire exercise out there in the field, and they'd set up a whole venue for the Army chief of staff and all that stuff, and it was crazy. And we were good. That was a good tough battalion. And then of course the reflag to 573rd RISTA, reconnaissance target surveillance acquisition. Good unit there, but it was kind of confusing at first. But that's when Colonel Pappas came on board, and I remember Colonel Pappas. He was a battalion or a company commander in Bravo Company 3 Panther when I was a young E4 back then, in 3 Panther back in the day. I remember he was a company commander.
Cool thing about when we transferred to from 3505 to 573, we picked up the CAV guys from down the street, right? That whole troop. Yep. What an amazing company that was. So we basically went from a 5-man company to a 6-man company. And then basically we actually were at 7 companies in the battalion at one point. And me and Pop sat down in the office with the XO, then Lou Ziesman, who I still keep in touch with, by the way. We sat down and said, how are we going to integrate this eclectic group of paratroopers, right? So our concept, when we walked out of the door, we said, if there is a armor lieutenant, we're going to pair them with a infantry platoon sergeant. And we did the same thing. So all the squad, you had one armor squad leader, you had one light infantry squad leader, and that's how we broke down the whole battalion as they stood up the RISTA. And it was a great mix because they were getting ready to go downrange to Iraq, and they were probably one of the highest decorated battalions during that time period for the service that they did in Iraq. And it was a great unit. I'm glad I had the ability to be part of the stand up for that unit. Before I came out here to Fort Riley.
Did you notice, our Major, a change in the Army when we changed from black boots to the brown boots?
Yeah, I still see it today, right? Soldiers got lazy. You guys spent many times in your bedrooms or in your office, getting out that white diaper with the shoe in the water and making sure that your jungle boots or your jump boots were ready to go for that day's event, right? I see soldiers walking. I'm not knocking them because it's a culture that they came into, but not to have to shine your boots. They don't do guard mount anymore. There's some value to that, to do guard mount, have the man, right, numero one guy, right? There's a lot of value to that. Being the SOG, being the officer of the guard, knowing your 3 general orders, or guard everything in the limits of my post and quit my post only when properly leave. I still remember it after almost 50 years ago, right? There's this value to that. So yeah, there is a shift. I wish we had more pride in our unit because I just think, the everyday uniform just looks raggedy. Now I do see some folks starch it. You're not supposed to starch it, but I mean they're trying. But there is something to be said with breaking starch every morning in a set of BDUs and putting on a highly spit shine pair of jump boots or jungle boots, right?
Yeah, Will and I talk about it all the time. That's the first impression. Back in the day, you used to walk in and spit shine BDUs, heavy starch BDUs, spit shine green jungle boots, high and tight, and then the next thing the first thing you ask, one of the first things, what's your PT score? 298, Sergeant. All right, I want them. Yeah. And that was it. That's how you got into your platoon or squad or whatever back in the day, First impression.
A lot of people say, now he's a Garrett trooper, right? There's not a difference. How you dress, whether you dress the way they do now and they roll their sleeves under and all that kind of stuff that drives me nuts, or you're wearing starch BDUs, that doesn't determine whether you're going to be tactically proficient or a good soldier wherever you go, right? That's just part of being a soldier. That's just another, level of doing day-to-day ops. So, I mean, there's always something to be said about getting a haircut. I'm kind of glad that Secretary Head Staff is getting away from this beard thing, because that was just totally out of control. I don't think they've got over that hump yet, but it's getting better.
It's getting there. Yeah, I drove on the other day. I drove on to don't get me wrong, Air National Guard base, and this dude I showed my ID card. Dude came out and he had a light beard on, and my wife was hitting me on the knee because I had to bite my tongue. She goes, "Don't say anything. That's not your game anymore. You play your cards. This is not your game." I was like, "You're right. I'm done with it." But man, it was crazy. They're still doing it, because I was like, "Didn't you get I wanted to say, didn't you get the memo? You've been watching TV. I mean, what's going on here?" Matter of fact, who's your command sergeant major? Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of crowded now. Going back, I'm gonna be on Fort Bragg for the first time in, I think, 22 years this July. Everybody tells me that. Matter of fact, I had a buddy of mine stay with me a little bit last summer. He's like, "Nate, don't do it, man. Don't go on Fort Bragg. You don't want to see it, man."
Ardennes is nothing like you remember. The company I work for does military housing. So one of our installations is Fort Bragg that we cover down on. So I'm there once or twice a year for a conference or an event. It's not one of the installations under my purview, but I'm there once or twice a year. And it has definitely changed for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what you're going to say.
It's it's like I said, I left out of there. I think it was December or January of 06, or December of 05, January 06, PCS out of there. But and I think that's when you left to be 4th Brigade Combat Team Command Sergeant Major there at Fort Riley.
I had the opportunity to come out to Fort Riley and stand up a brigade, 4th Brigade, the 1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1. First time I've ever been in the unit. Never been, even though we were standing up a light unit, it was part of a mechanized division.
Yeah.
That was, we grew that 4th Brigade, and we deployed them during the surge. It was 15 months of deployment there. And then after that, I was fortunate to interview and got selected as the division sergeant major for the Big Red 1. So, yeah.
Ooh.
Tell me about that, Sergeant Major. Tell me about being a division command sergeant major. You have got to see everything, the full gamut, right? You got an entire divisions of soldiers just screwing up, and you got to deal with it at some level. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah. So I didn't even know I was interviewing for the job. I was, 3/4 through the 15th month deployment. I'd come back to Fort Riley, to visit my family on my leave, and there was a new commander by the name of Major General Bob Durbin, was the division commander at the time, and John Foreman was the sergeant major. And I bumped into John, and I knew him from the past, and he said, "Hey, come on up and see the boss tomorrow." So I went in there and gave him a laydown of what we've been doing there in Iraq and everything like that. Talked to him a little bit, and that was it. And back in those days, selection was a little different. You submitted a packet when they were doing division sergeant majors, and then the commanders would interview, and then they would make their selection. So I submitted my packet, and I'm not hearing nothing. I don't know. I said, is he gonna select me to do an interview? I don't know. And one day I'm in my office in Iraq, and the phone call comes in, and it's his secretary saying, "Hey, Sergeant Major, General Durbin wants to talk to you." And this is how the conversation, I kid you not, he goes, "New danger 7, don't get killed. I'll see you in a couple months."
Oh,
what he said.
Don't get killed.
That was his confirmation, hey, you're coming on to be the division sergeant major. I said, okay, that's great. But so it was a great experience. So Bob Durbin, I had him just for only a couple months. Great story. You've probably seen him over there, and that's not one of my proudest moments. We did this change of command. So Force Com commander's there, getting ready to do the flag and everything. And my S3 sergeant major, who is a former paratrooper, goes, "Hey, Jim, I got these 2 guys that want to skydive. They're going to come in on the parade field and do all this." I said, "Oh, man, Steve, I don't know, man." Right. And he talked me into it. Right. So we did a demo. They did it. they were kind of shaky, and I said, I don't think I'm going to pull the plug on this. He goes, no, they'll be okay tomorrow, right? So we did a 82nd Division style change of command, right? And they were mad at me because I made them wear bayonets and and all that kind of stuff, right? And so we're doing it, and they like everybody. So before, just like the division review, when the guys come in and do the skydive thing, they tell you nobody looks up at them. Nobody looks up at the guys coming out.
Right.
So I give our guys the same spiel. Nobody looks up, eyes front, right? And this guy comes in and he misses the mark and he plows right through the band. Takes out like 7 people in the band. Knocks one out cold, right? So I've been to Division Sergeant Major maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And I'm just thinking to myself as I'm running out onto the field, I'm fired. I'm done. I'm retired.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But lucky enough, nobody was hurt. That's the first and foremost. That was good. And then when I still see Bob Durbin, it's something that we chuckle about. So he didn't fire me. But it was just crazy. But as a Division Sergeant Major, when I first went in and talked to General Durbin, I said, "Hey, sir, my real big focus, besides resourcing the units and coaching my non-commissioned officers, is to brand the division. I want people to come to the 1st Infantry Division because I would just tell you, as an outsider looking in, whether I was in the 101st or the 82nd." Nobody really cared about the Big Red One. There's not something like, say, man, I want to go to Fort Riley, or then they were in Germany. I want to go to Germany and be a Big Red One soldier. So I said, I want to bring in those type of non-commissioned officers and that mindset into the division. So I actively recruited. I went to Fort Benning. I went to RTB. I went to Jump Master Pathfinder. I pulled guys out of the 82nd that I knew, senior guys, and I said, bring your guys out of the Ranger Regiment I knew, try to pull them in, the guys that wanted to take a break for a while and do something different than the high tempo Ranger stuff. And we were building this core of soldiers in a first ID, and you could just see how it just went to another level. But that was really my main focus there in the 1st Infantry Division, was get the division branded and make people want to come to Fort Riley and be part of an organization. I used to tell them during the in-briefs, the new soldiers, I would say, we have no bench players here. Everybody's a starter, So, welcome to the team, starter. And, it's at a whole different level. When you're in the general officer arena as their senior enlisted advisor, and I had 4. I had Bob Durbin. I had Perry Wiggins, who used to be the Combat Aviation Brigade commander there in the 82nd when we were there at Aggie. And then I had Vince Brooks, and me and him deployed to Basra together. And then finally I had Bill Mayville, who's an old 82nd guy that came in afterwards. So 4 great generals, 4 different personalities.
Wow.
But it was just great to be part of an organization. And, I always tell them, just love the ones you're with. So we would get the Ranger guys in, we would get the 82nd guys in. I said, don't ever take away the past, your time in the 82nd or the Ranger Regiment or 101st. But now I want you to embrace the 1st Infantry Division and make it the best division, best assignment that you can. So, it was one of the highlights of it was the culminating event, actually, because I retired out of the 1st Infantry Division after that. So, there you go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Here's the question for you, Sergeant Major. Okay. You just got a letter from your government that says you're recalled back to the United States Army, but you get to pick your unit and the job assignment that you're going to. What job are you going back to?
Command Sergeant Major, 3 Panther.
Oh, wow. Amen. Yeah. There's something about that culture that you're trying to build with the Big Red One that was obviously in place in the 82nd. If you were ever a part of some unit in the 82nd, that becomes your home somehow. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went back 3 times. So I went back, I started there. I came back as a young sergeant, staff sergeant, and then I came back as a command sergeant major. So when the old adage of back to brag, yeah, you're going to go back to brag. I mean, if that's something that you really love, and I did, I loved being there. I loved the culture. I loved just being around paratroopers. And the senior non-commissioned officers were far bar none the best that I ever had to work with. Great sergeant majors. So yeah, it was a great environment.
Yeah, I mean, after a while, you learn all the ranges, all the drop zones. I mean, you're an expert at everything that on the grounds of Fort Bragg. So it makes it a lot easier too. When you're senior. Go ahead, Will.
So, Sergeant Major, break down just a little bit your leadership philosophy that you might brief a new NCO that's coming into your unit. We already learned about some of your tough love with Ranger Nate. It's like, you go to Ranger school and then tell me about that.
My biggest thing. So I was always about influencing 2 levels down, just like they say, right? So when I was a battalion sergeant major, my focus was on the platoon sergeants, and Aggie can tell you that I focused on them hard, and particularly, their role in shaping the officer corps. So I would always tell the platoon sergeants, hey, you are the first look that this young lieutenant has of a senior non-commissioned officer. If that lieutenant fails, it's because you failed him. And I was very hard on the platoon sergeants on making sure that they not only train their lieutenants, but they set them up for success. You don't need to be out in front. Push all the accolade stuff to the lieutenant, because I know the commander knows that you're the one training them, and I always told them that when a new soldier comes into the unit, they've just made the first 5 best friends of their lives. When they come into that team, everybody's got to put their arms around them. It's not about being a cherry anymore. It's not about, they're still going to be the new guy and you can have some fun with them and stuff like that. But it should be like brothers, having fun with another brother, right? Not just harassing and all that kind of stuff. Training, if you didn't do it right, do it again, right? If you're getting it right, change the conditions, not the standards, just change the conditions of what you're doing. Make it harder. Be hard, but be fair. People mess up. They have to at times understand what the consequences are for that, but it's how they rebound afterwards, right? Be fair across the board. Doesn't matter, the background of the soldier or what they do. Select those that you see potential and move forward. Don't just bring somebody along just because they've been a specialist for 3 years. Sometimes they just won't be a sergeant, right? But, just growing. When you leave, I always tell everybody, it's not about what they say about you when you're there. It's after you leave and they come back 5 or 6 later. They're like, hey man, I didn't understand the method to your madness when you were, my platoon sergeant or first sergeant or whatever. But now that I'm a first sergeant, I get it, so.
Absolutely. Yep. That's one thing I could say. He taught me a lot about the structure level of non-commissioned officers, the senior non-commissioned officers overlooking, 2 levels up, 2 levels down. And he was focused on platoon sergeants. We used to stand there, sergeant major, we used to call it, what was that? The courtroom, Friday night court or whatever. And kids that had gotten in trouble and stuff. And all the platoon sergeants in that battalion were tight, man. And that's because you all ran a tight ship on us. And I'm like, oh man, you back again? What happened? Oh man, same thing as last month, man. And we'd stand there in the hallway and wait for you to come out and get us and stuff. But I tell you what, we were tight, man. I could go sit down in the chow hall with any first sergeant or any platoon sergeant in that battalion. They didn't have to be in your same company. Just go sit down with a Delta company, Alpha company, go sit with Bravo company. And we were just tight. It was a tight group. And not all battalions were like that. I was in 2 other battalions in the 505th. I got 3 PCSs in the 505th, and not every battalion had that. You see a lot of command sergeants major that you didn't see down at the platoon level hardly. They pretty much stayed at battalion headquarters, and you'd see them at a jump, or you'd see them at PT or the 4-mile run, battalion award ceremony and stuff like that, payday activities. But you didn't see them down at the battalion level like Sergeant Major Champagne, down at the company level. Hey, Sergeant Augie, yeah, what's up, man? Sergeant Major Champagne's downstairs for you. I said, what? Oh man, I'd get down there. He'd look at me and go, "Oh, I figured." I was like, "What's up, Sergeant Major? How long does this kid need a haircut?" Oh shit, Sergeant Major, it's Monday morning. I'll get to him. I'll get to him. He better have a haircut by 09 platoon sergeant. You hear me? Roger that, Sergeant Major. I'll get him squared away, man. That's what I'm talking about right there, man. But I always got those words. Hey, Sergeant August, Sergeant Major
Remember
Champagne
Jason
downstairs.
Leeworthy?
What's that?
You remember Jason Leeworthy?
Oh, absolutely, Leeworthy. Oh yeah.
So I remember walking into Charlie Company one day, and I'm walking down, walk by the first sergeant's office. I look in there, he's not in there. And then I hear this guy, in a loud voice down there in the stairwell. And I see all these privates in the opening looking into the stairwell. And I said, what the hell's going on there? So I walk down in there and I poke my head in there. And there's Leeworthy. He's got 3 trash cans, one full of soapy water, one full of, whatever, and then another, rinse water. And he's in there giving them a class on how to wash their TA-50. And I said, hey, First Sergeant, what's going on? He goes, these schmuckatellis, they don't even know how to clean their TA-50. They can't lay out. They put trash. It looks like shit. So I'm going to show them how to do it. So he was out there leading by example, man, showing them how to clean TA-50s.
There you go. That's awesome.
But it was just a lot of fun. You get a lot of that stuff when you walk around. You get to see a lot of that stuff. And what I found out also too, if you're involved and you're being visually seen, the soldiers within the organization are gonna feel comfortable while approaching you. And I always used to ask. I would ask a tough question. The guy, I'd be talking to a young paratrooper, and yeah, Sergeant Major, I'm getting divorced, and I said, well, why are you getting divorced? What happened? Where a lot of leaders would never ask a question like that. Well, was it because you were drunk and you were hanging out with all your buddies in the barracks and not spending any time with your wife? And then you start seeing that stuff in their face. They're like, damn, man, nobody asked me a question like that. And I did that so that the younger leaders, the E5s, the E6s, the E7s, feel comfortable enough to, ask those questions. Because a lot of folks say, hey, that's none of my business. He's getting divorced. I don't want to talk about his divorce. But you got to ask those tough questions, and they feel comfortable after a while, and they're going to tell you, what they feel. So yeah, that was my focus. I had to be visual.
That's awesome.
Tell me about a particularly long night or a time of loss, or sometimes as a leader, you go to combat and you deal with things that are out of your control. Do you remember a time that you could talk about?
Yeah, I would tell you probably one of the hardest nights I ever had, and Aggie would know this, was when we lost Sergeant First Class Jose Rivera in Iraq. We were on the back end of the deployment, and Jose was out on a patrol, and they got hit by an RPG, and he was killed. And and the story behind it, and the reason why it really hit me hard was when Jose just came off of recruiting. He was in E7. And similar to Aggie, I said, hey, I'm not going to put you in a platoon until you go to Ranger school. Just because everybody else down there is Ranger qualified, So I think I made him like the S5 NCO of the battalion, right? So he did that, doing great. He was a great non-commissioned officer, getting ready. He was physically fit. He was a stud. Couldn't swim. And so we were getting him, we had people teaching him how to swim, and he was getting better and better, and he was getting ready to go. And then we got notified to go to Iraq in the summer of 03. Yeah. And I called him up to my office. I said, hey, Sergeant Rivera, I'm going to put you in a platoon in Delta Company, and you're going to deploy with this platoon and everything. So he did the train up. He said, thanks, Sergeant Major. You're not going to be disappointed. I'm not going to let you down. And he did a great job as a platoon sergeant. His platoon loved him. He was technically proficient, held them to the standard. And when we lost Jose that night, that was the only loss that we had on that deployment. But that was probably the hardest night that I've had to experience when I was there in 82nd. Just losing that great non-commissioned officer was tough for the organization.
Oh, yep. Bless you. Yeah, I wear this thinking about him, and that's I remember Sergeant Major prior to the deployment, prior to me going to ANOC and leaving Fort Bragg and going on to my next journey before I linked up with you guys in Iraq. But I remember Jose and I got kind of close because we were both the E6 promotable / E7 that didn't get to jump right in there, and so it kind of bonded us. We had like a little bonding with each other. We'd eat breakfast together every day and stuff, and yeah, that hit me hard. And I wasn't there at the time. I was just finishing Ranger school, but when I got back from Ranger school, they told me the news, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, man, this place is jacked up. But yeah, that was a tough time for the whole battalion, for the whole division, actually.
Yeah, there was a little consolation to losing Jose, that we dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on the house of the guys who ambushed him. So that was a good night when we put the squash on him.
Roger that. Yep.
So what's the next step hold for you, Sergeant Major? You said you're getting ready to retire. What's the next?
So I love the outdoors, man. I love to hunt. I've hunted all over the world, been to South Africa, shot those animals, been to Canada, Alaska, all over the United States. So I'll continue to do that. I love doing that. Now that we just bought a house in Florida, vacation home down there, hopefully I'm going to do a different type of hunting, and I'll start fishing. And that's really it, man. When I retire, that's it. I'm just going to enjoy my family, my friends. Like I told you, I'm fortunate enough to live right next to my best friend, General Wiggins. We live right next door to each other. He's got 15 acres over there, and I got 12 acres right next to him, right here in the middle of the Flint Hills of Kansas. So it's great that you could have an opportunity to have a relationship with one of your former bosses to the point where now you're best friends and you're living next to them, and yeah, it's a good thing. But I think retirement is coming soon, Will. That's what I want to do. I always remember my time in the 82nd. Every time I see a paratrooper in the airport or something like that, I always go up there and talk to them and see where they're going and what they're doing. Yeah, the 3 tours in the 82nd were great. They shaped me to the person that I was at the senior level. So I mean, I'm very grateful for all the people that mentored me at Fort Bragg and all the soldiers I served with, because they're some of the finest soldiers in the Army. And this is very very cool that you have this podcast. So thanks for having me on this morning. I enjoy my time. I get to link up with Augie here. I haven't seen in a while. Get to meet you, Will. And thanks. And you said you were in Dothan, Alabama. So are you an aviator, retired aviator, First Sergeant?
Negative. I grew up here. That's where my family's from. I never was stationed at Rucker or anything like that. Now, my dad did. He was a test coordinator in the 60s on the Chinook. Okay. And then he stayed in the aviation industry. He ended up being one of those evil defense contractors that worked for Lockheed, selling Hellfire missiles to all of our future enemies for years. But now he's retired, and anyway. So yeah, I was in the 82nd. I joined in 87 and retired in 2009. And I just had a wonderful, wonderful career. I was an air defense guy. Spent time at the Advanced Airborne School, and spent a lot of time, as a SHORAD guy in the 82nd and 3rd of the 4th, and then ended up as a Patriot First Sergeant in the air defense, out at Bliss and deployed all over the place. But anyway, I just started all of this. One day, one of my jump master buddies, his wife, called me and said, "Hey, Maggot can't remember anymore. Maggot's having problems with his memory, and they think he's got a brain tumor." And so I called him on the phone, and I tried to record all the stories while he could still remember. And that started a series called Heroes I Know. And that started about 10 years ago. I've done over 200 interviews now. Wow. You can go to Marshall in the Middle on YouTube, Marshall in the Middle on Facebook, marshallinthemiddle.com, and you can see all those interviews. And the idea is just to get our stories told before we're too old or too sick to tell them. I know too many great Americans that I served with. And of course, I've interviewed my Sunday school teacher and my pastor and my mom and dad, and just it's amazing the stories that each one of us individually have and all the things that we've overcome. And Sergeant Major, it's an honor to have met you and to be here and have you on the show. Ranger Nate and I are becoming really great friends. He's a wonderful American.
Yeah.
And so we're going to sign off, everybody. So everybody say bye all the way. And we're going to be out. Don't go anywhere, Sergeant Major.
Okay.
What just happened? Let me hit this again. There we go.
Marshall in the middle.